Welcome back, agents of change. In this session, we are diving into something truly exciting, integrating SmythOS with Google Drive API for advanced file indexing. This isn't just about connecting to Google. It's about leveraging SmythOS to create powerful custom solutions. Let's join Mike as he walks us through this process, showing us how to overcome common hurdles and create a robust file indexing system.
Let's go ahead and share with you something we created. This is actually not using the G Drive component because it didn't have exactly what we needed in our case, which was to actually list specific file folders in a specific folder. And so just to give you a look into what this does, this is actually a get call. And this is actually calling the files API in the Drive API version 3.
Notice how Mike's starting with a custom solution. This showcases the flexibility of SmythOS when standard components don't quite fit your needs.
And then in there we have a number of items. Basically gives us the query as well, and we can take a look at that in detail. And this is actually taking a variable from a previous thing, because remember, LLMs don't understand time. So in order to get a timestamp from 24 hours ago, we had to use a code block in the previous one. And then we're setting a few things to true and identifying that we only want to look at files, not files and directories. That's all in the documentation for that. But we can't make this call without having our client ID and client secret. In addition to the core of these will actually be filled in as part of when you choose a Google authentication service, right? And in fact, just so you can get an idea here, when you actually were to do this, so this actually signed me out. So you guys are going to actually see me sign in and authenticate like we talked about. And I've already set up my client ID and client secret. This is using custom. I'm going to go back to Google. So in this case, what I'm looking for the scope here, this is the scope for the API call that I'm going to make, which is Gmail read only. I'm not going to be writing any mail in this case, but and actually this is the wrong scope. This is giving us a default scope, but pretty sure this is the client ID and client secret. Give me just a moment. And I may need to go back because it's not Gmail. It's I believe it's G Drive. This is probably going to fail because I have the wrong scope here, but I'm going to fake it. This is what I get for trying to do this on the fly without trying things. And then I'm going to need to authenticate.
Watch closely as Mike navigates the authentication process. This is a crucial step in setting up any Google API integration.
Yeah, so that's because I don't have, there's no such thing as a scope for G Drive read only. So I need to make sure that I get the right scope here. So while this authentication works, chances are my API call is not going to work until I get the scope correctly. Can I get one of the people on my team to go ahead and get the correct scope and then send it to me? Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's help. and everyone's patience here, but this is what happens when I try and do things on the fly. Actually, you know what I might be able to do? Might be able to not save this. In other words, if I don't click on this button, it may not have saved that. I'm going to try that. There we go. With it, actually.
Mark, I think the meeting chat here.
Thank you. Okay. So this is, now I'm in viewer mode because either someone else has been trying to get in, and yeah, so whoever did a great job in trying to help, please get out of the agent now. And we are good to go. Okay.
Mike's encountering a common issue with API scopes. Pay attention to how he troubleshoots this. It's a valuable skill in API integration.
So we go back to authentication. There we go. This is the correct authentication. And I'm going to need to authenticate here in order to make this work. But again, this, by the way, this is actually going to come from the API that you're using. It will give you a particular scope when you're working with that API, and in the process of looking at that, it will give you the potential scopes. There's also a read-write scope. Or I don't think it's called read-write. I think it's called something else. But anyway, this is the correct one for our specific API call. Now we're going to have to authenticate.
Here's Mike explaining the importance of choosing the right API scope. This can significantly impact your app's permission and functionality.
So now you're probably like, okay, so I want to see it to believe it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run a debug of this particular process. What this process does is it goes and looks at files that have been added in the last 24 hours, and then essentially adds them to a queue to be processed. And in particular, what we're doing with these files is we're actually adding them to a data pool, which we will look at tomorrow. And that in that data pool, those are added as sources in that data pool to further improve the scope and scale of answers for a bot that actually looks at things. This is not the production version. This was our development version. Production version is on different instances of Smith. So we don't have to worry too much about anything falling apart or going crazy here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and run this. And here we're going to go ahead and again, I just set this up with a trigger. We don't actually need this. And step through, this is going to go through a loop, as this is looking specifically at hard-coded drive folders. And these are actually set up as variables here. And since these are hard-coded, these are looking specifically at different places within our Google Drive where those occur. And then for each of those folders, and in this case, this is starting with the folder media appearances, it's going to go through, get the folder ID, add a 24-hour timestamp, and then go ahead and call our Google Drive API call to list the folders or the file folders that are there. So if we step into that, we will see that in this particular case, we did get a file. We got a kind file. So on, it gives them this is actually a Google Doc. I need to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see. So this gave us a Google Doc and gives us the file information. That's fantastic. Now I need to close this. So that gives the files, and for each of those files, it goes through and then extracts the file information specifically. So it took that complex document and then used an LLM specifically an echo model to go ahead and pull those specific pieces out separately. And while we add that to the API output, we are then pushing those into a database and then moving out. So the whole point here is basically to look for new files inside of a Google Drive, a number of Google Drive folders, and then take those files and then push them into a database for, and then identify them as in that database, identify them as unprocessed, right? So there's a field in there, so it knows that there's this drive ID, this folder ID, and the file that needs to be processed or basically added to our data pool.
Now we are seeing the custom API call in action. Mike's demonstrating how it indexes recent files from Google Drive.
All right, and there may be thousands of files, which is why we separated this out as a batch. This is one example of how to use a Google Drive indexer. I'm sorry, a Google API component, or use an API call to actually make a call to a Google API. Okay, any questions here? Does everybody understand that in particular what we did here? For most API calls where you have an API key, you will not have to use OAuth, but the way that Google works, the same thing is true, for example, in order to get some write access for example, Asana, you're going to have to set up OAuth. For Salesforce.com, you have to have an OAuth set up there. And if you are not covered by one of these, you can absolutely use the custom or basic OAuth client credentials and work with that for your API call. But for each of the Google ones, you're going to need, just the way that Google is working, you're going to need to set those up yourself and set up OAuth, add that client ID and that client secret, and it will work.
Fantastic demonstration, Mike. We've seen how to set up a custom Google Drive API integration, handle authentication challenges, and create a powerful file indexing system. This combination of API integration and SmythOS processing capabilities opens up endless possibilities for data management and analysis. Remember, SmythOS creators, while pre-built components are great, don't be afraid to create custom solutions when needed. Until then, keep innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible with SmythOS and API integrations.